Cy, good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
It's good afternoon here. It's good morning there, right?
Exactly. Good morning
Okay, all right.
and good afternoon.
And a good afternoon here. Okay, if it's a good morning for you and a good afternoon for me, that means we're not in the same time zone. So I know you a little bit, but nobody knows you in terms of possibly the audience of the Culture Matters podcast. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where do you come from? Where are you currently? And what would you consider your so-called cultural frame of reference?
Sure, I've been raised in the United States,
Mhm.
and I'm actually in my office in Omaha, Nebraska today, which is unusual. I travel about 4 to 5 days a week. I'm in over 200 countries, 200 companies each year,
Uh-huh.
and I get the opportunity with that to be in many countries. My frame of reference, I grew up in a very small town in Iowa, a farming community, and pretty homogeneous cultural background, but was so fortunate in
Uh-huh.
my high school and college years to live and travel extensively. And actually, I'm graduated from gymnasium in Deutschland in Germany.
Okay.
So I have some experience on the European continent.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds interesting. Omaha, Nebraska. How much time difference is that? It's a quarter past four here. What time are you at?
It's 9 a.m., a quarter past 9 here in the
Okay.
morning.
All right. Okay.
So
Fair
you can
enough.
do the math on that.
Yes.
So
That
in
sounds good.
business wise, I started out as a therapist or a counselor
Uh huh.
and then became a leader in healthcare. So I went from studying international relations in college,
Uh huh.
in university, and ended up going back and getting a degree and being a counselor, and then went on to get my master's degree in healthcare administration, which is all about the business side of healthcare.
Okay.
And I've been researching and writing ever since on the topic of drama in the workplace.
How do you match that? I mean, how do you match that with the previous thing?
Exactly. It's been kind of a windy road, but for me, it's always been the study of how humans not only spend their energy into what return on investment, but in international relations, it was a lot about how egos show up as countries,
Hmm.
and then as a counselor, about how egos show up individually. And now, since ego is the main source of drama in the workplace, how our egos come out to play at work so that and we may not even know that they're out to play,
Hmm.
but they create a lot of emotional waste and really distract us from great results and wonderful working environments.
Okay.
And so I think the red thread through all of that has been the study of ego and the chaos it can create in business or in life.
Okay, we're going to talk about this because a little bit further down the podcast, because this is you're referring to your book, your upcoming book, at least at the time of the recording. Your ego is not your amigo. That's the book
Right.
that you're referring to, which will be published on September 19th, 2017, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
Having
absolutely.
having
And the
said that,
title is all about your ego not being your amigo. The official title, if people are looking for that, is No Ego, and how leaders can cut the cost of drama, end
okay.
entitlement, and drive big results.
Okay, all right. Well, I definitely want to dig into that a little bit further, a little bit later in this podcast interview. Um, but for the people who are listening to this in the future, this book has been published on September 19th, 2017. But we'll mention it a couple of times further down the line. In my research in terms of preparing for this podcast, I came across a phrase here. It says your first degree was in international relations, with an
Yes.
emphasis on third world economic development, right? And
Yep.
then you've worked internationally throughout Europe, like you said, in Germany. Well, you've been in Germany when you were younger, at least. Mexico, Australia, and India as well. You've traveled extensively with your own kids, your own children, working to interrupt their own thinking about culture and life. So I'm curious, as an American that has a passport and has been outside of his own country or her own country, please tell us a little bit how that period has shaped you, maybe your kids as well, but also your view on current business or leadership as such.
Absolutely. I think the biggest way that travel has shaped me and what I'm hoping then to do for my kids is, we all are ethnocentric, I think, growing up, and
Mm-hmm.
especially in America, we're well protected from the rest of the world. And so I can grow up really believing that little bit that I know is the right way. So if just because I've experienced it, part of me comes to believe that it's the right or only way. And when I was a student in Germany, I was blown away the first time I was in history class,
Hmm.
because I'm hearing the history as presented in Germany about the same world events.
Yeah.
And I realized that what I thought history was just a telling of the facts was a huge interpretation through my own lens. I was like 16 years old, and it blew my mind to think that there were other ways of seeing the exact same events. And it came to me then how often we interpret reality or distort reality, whether it's through ego, which is a judgmental, biased way of distorting
Hmm.
reality, or just through our own cultural lens. And it
Can you
got
give
to
an
be
example? Can you give a specific example?
absolutely. So when we were talking about, I was, this will date me, but I was in Germany during the years that President Reagan was a president of the United States.
Hmm.
And in the United States, it was all about Reagan kept us safe.
Yeah.
And then I stopped every single day on my way riding my bike to gymnasium to wait for these huge caravans of American armed forces to pass through the city that I was in.
Hmm.
And not only was it irritating, but it was offensive in a way. And then I, my coloring is very dark. And at the times, I would be a lot of times assumed to be from Turkish descent.
Uh-huh.
And the Turkish people were guest workers in Germany at the time.
Yeah.
And so I was also exposed to some of the negativity around the guest worker program because people would assume that I was German. And one time I said, I got very angry, and I said to a gentleman who was negative towards me, I said, please stop, I'm not Turkish.
Mm.
And he said, well, what are you? And I said, I'm American. And he said, that's the only thing worse.
That's pretty straightforward.
Because there was so much military
Uh-huh.
in and then I started to see how people's different perspectives were as we traveled then to Moscow during my gymnasium time. And I met with somebody in Russia
Hmm.
and was a friend of theirs. And we were there for a couple of weeks. And we were talking about, I had been taught that Russians had lots of propaganda. And she made a comment that she said, well, at least we know our news is propaganda. And this was in the 80s. And so
Mm.
all over the place, for specific examples, my mind was just being blown because I realized how narrow my exposure and interpretation of the world was.
Hmm.
And so I didn't know what to think, but I knew to question what I think.
Mm.
And that is something I work with a lot of my kids and employees on, is be very careful what you think you know for sure.
Yeah.
And don't always believe everything you think, and really question it. Really pay attention to your experiences and look for how you're wrong, and instead of why you're right. Because most of us try and look for confirmation of how we're right. And those experiences really taught me to look for confirmation of how I could be wrong on this, because that really opens me up to some even better approaches, or together we're genius,
Uh-huh.
some more inclusive thought.
Okay. What is the biggest thing that stuck in your mind, whereby you still remember back, like, oh, I was really wrong about this or that,
Oh my gosh.
or
Well,
I had a
definitely,
different opinion? I mean, right and
yeah,
wrong is, it makes it so black and white.
it does. Just such a different opinion on, it's hard to pinpoint one, because I could say like most of the world. Um, some of it became a better understanding of my own father. My
Hmm.
father was, his family was an immigrant, and
Not from
he would
Turkey.
take, not from
No.
Turkey, but
Okay.
they were gypsy by background, which
Uh-huh.
is even more interesting.
Yes.
But he would very much every Sunday take us, and we saw it as just a mandatory family fun day where he would take us to look at art or listen to music. And he really focused on the humanities. At a time in my schooling, we were very focused on the sciences. And he just really talked about how important it was to be well-rounded in the humanities. And when I came to live in Germany,
Hmm.
one of the things I was wrong about, or at least unprepared for, is really coming to understand how hard it is to relate to other people when you don't have a grasp of history or great literature or
True.
international art pieces. Like there's some great work that many cultures have brought, and if you haven't been touched by their art or their music or their work, when I'm traveling throughout India, it's very difficult then to really connect with the people.
Yes.
And so it was a way that I found out I was wrong in not agreeing with my dad, thinking this was just old country stuff. But it really was a portal that could connect me to many, many people.
Okay. Out of the countries that you've visited, or outside of the U.S., that is, what is your most favorite country?
I would have to say that it would be India. I am absolutely in love with India. And India is, thousands of countries, it seems like, within one country. And so I've traveled in, the South. I haven't been to the East yet, but the South, the West, the North, and everything from a wonderful houseboat trip through the backwaters of southern India, clear down to leaving and going to the Maldives, a different country, but absolutely love all the paradoxes in India, all of the visual sensations, and just really disarming and almost gets you off your center so that you can learn. It gets you out of your comfort zone. So you have nothing left but to just sit back and experience.
True. It's the I really love how the Lonely Planet guide on India actually starts describing India, and one of the first sentences they use in the Lonely Planet guide is, "India is an assault on the senses."
Oh, that's so perfect.
Because that could be positive or negative. It's there's garbage everywhere, but there's beauty everywhere, and many of these kind of combinations. And yeah, it wakes you up for sure. Yes,
it does wake you up. I have 4 sons, and every other year we try and take a great trip. And our favorite family trip was through India. We were in North India and in Rajasthan, and it was really mind-boggling and eye-opening for my sons. It was a kind of a life-changing event for them.
Good for them. Excellent that you actually did that. India is that's a long way from the United States.
It is. We try and do something very adventurous.
Yeah.
I want them to know their old mom still has a little adventure in her.
All right. So how did you get from all that to something which, if I'm not mistaken, which is your thing? I'm making air quotes here.
Yes.
Reality-based leadership.
How
did you move from A to B there?
Absolutely. I was working as a counselor, and as I was working with people, I started to notice patterns in what led to happiness and success and what didn't. And they actually were the mental processes people use. And so many of the people I saw as a professional were really focused on wanting more happiness or more success in their lives. And I would ask them, if that's what they wanted, there's thousands of years of universal principles to learn the principles and then just follow those teachings, whether it's spirituality or religion or philosophy, or there's a lot of information out there how to be happy or successful. But I would ask them what they had tried. And a couple of things I noticed when I was a therapist that I noticed when I was a leader is most people wanted to focus on why they couldn't rather than how they could. And they wanted to focus on what they thought about instead of what they wanted to create. So I noticed as a counselor, I spent a lot of time in our sessions moving people's energy away from why it wouldn't work or what was wrong to what we want to create and how it could work. And as I went on to be a leader, I found out that I did more managing energy than I managed people. I literally in every meeting had to move people away from talking about why we shouldn't have to and why it wouldn't work to how it could. And I also noticed in the clients I worked with as a therapist that they really believed if only their reality was different, if only they had more money, or if their spouse acted differently, or they had a different job or a different boss, they would be happy. And I had to teach them a lot that your happiness isn't correlated to your circumstances. It's correlated to the amount of accountability you take for your circumstances. So your circumstances aren't why you can't succeed. They're the reality in which you must succeed. Well, I was promoted then into leadership of the whole group, the hospital that did therapy. And I noticed that exactly what my patients or clients needed to learn, most of my employees needed to learn or
Hmm.
were not practicing at that time. And so I started to do what I call reality-based leadership. They would say, well, we would be great if only we had more money or we had fewer patients or if the physicians, the
Right.
doctors did something different. And I was constantly helping them understand that that's our reality. How can we still be successful and happy within that reality? So it was what I learned as far as great mental processes that worked with individuals. I started to apply those to leadership and found out that we created incredibly successful, happy teams,
Hmm.
and people started to notice our results and asked us often to speak about how we were getting those. And that's really how it all started.
So is reality-based leadership, is that linked to your book? Your ego is not your amigo, or no ego?
Yes.
So,
Yes. So the first book I wrote was called Reality Based Leadership.
uh-huh.
And the second book was Reality Based Rules of the Workplace. And now this third book is No Ego.
Okay, so to tell us a little bit more about that. What does that mean? Because the first thing that pops up in my mind when you say ego or no ego is Freud, Sigmund Freud.
Yeah.
So is that linked, or where do you get that from?
It's a bit linked,
Uh-huh.
although Freud had a very specific way of talking about ego and
Hmm.
superego and id, and we're not with that construct. But um, I the ego is really our filter on reality. So if you want to be reality based, you need to know how much your ego comes out to play because it's like a pair of prescription glasses you wear that are oftentimes the wrong prescription. And it really makes sense of the world in a distorted way. It corrupts your data. It paints you as a victim.
Sure.
It tends to paint things as negative. Um, the ego isn't your confidence. It's really this filter on the world that if you are believing the narration your ego has, if you're believing everything you think, rather than realizing that your thinking and your ego narrating doesn't represent reality, you'll make better choices and really feel better about work.
But
Um,
can I differ? Because what I perceive is my reality. Isn't that's what it is? I find beauty, that's my reality. I find ugliness, that's my reality. I feel sad, that's my reality. Isn't my reality my reality?
Actually, what's surprising to most people is no, it's
Okay.
not. Just like we all have unconscious bias when
Uh
it
huh.
comes to a cultural perspective, our ego, if you wake up in the morning,
Hmm.
you don't start by saying, let me start thinking. You're already being thought. And your ego's always narrating the world. So I may see a light switch on the wall, if
Yes.
that's where my country has their light switches, if I have electricity. I may
Sure.
see a light switch on the wall. The direct relationship is that I see something on the wall. The minute I go on in my
Hmm.
thinking to go, that's a light switch, it's kind of ugly. I think it's the wrong color.
Hmm.
I wonder why the contractor put it there. He put it there because he was trying to take advantage of me. He probably used that because he
Hmm.
had it on hand rather than buying what I wanted. Wait a minute.
I got
He,
screwed.
yeah, I got screwed. Everything past there's something on my wall is the story the ego attaches to it,
Yeah.
with the final conclusion that I got screwed. Now let's go back and look at reality. All I know for sure is there's a light switch on my wall.
Hmm.
I don't know that the contractor screwed me.
No.
And so what most people don't realize is that they're always adding in story, motive, judgment. Um, and so even our emotions
Hmm.
aren't necessarily from our reality. They're usually from the story we made up about our reality, right? Unless it's a real visceral reaction. A great example I use in the workplace is, let's say I have a boss
Hmm.
who calls me up and asks me the status of my project.
Hmm.
And so far, there's no pain. I answer the phone. He asks me how my project's going. I let him know I'm a little behind.
Hmm.
That's the truth.
Yes.
He might say, I've noticed you're behind on a lot of things. That's true too.
Hmm.
And I may say, I've noticed that about myself. And I'm just wondering, what ideas do you have for me? Because I would like to make sure I'm clear about priorities and focus in the right places. So far, there's just no pain in this story until I make up the story that he's a micromanager who treats me like a child, and he's calling me up because he's looking for people to fire, and I'll probably be fired. And I have a son in med school, and he wanted to help children in Uganda, and now people in Uganda are going to die.
Right.
I'm in a lot of pain. But what caused my pain was my story, not my reality. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And so most of us, until we really are aware, don't realize how often our ego is determining our feelings and our outcomes, by the way, because I'll act based on that interpretation. And so what I found in my research from my first book to my third book, and the reason it's called No Ego, How Leaders Can Cut the Cost of Workplace Drama, is that there is a waste in most of our workplaces called drama or emotional waste. And in my studies, I found out that the average person spends 2.5 hours a day in drama.
So
walking
again,
around.
Define drama in this case.
Drama is disruptive behavior or thinking. It's gossiping, tattling, complaining, scorekeeping, resisting change, withholding buy-in, withholding engagement. Just really focused on how I'm the victim and how reality's done me wrong. It's this ego story. And ego, when we looked at the sources of drama, because this is 816 hours per year per person, that is waste. It's leaking out of what could be results or happiness or both. And so when you think about this waste, the way we get rid of waste in business is through better processes. And the way we get rid of emotional waste is through better mental processes. And these mental processes are above culture. They are some evidence-based scientific ways of thinking that actually lead us to less stress and less emotional waste and better results. And so 30% of the drama in the workplace, we looked at the sources of drama, came from ego. And my ego is the part of me that's always scorekeeping. It assigns motive. It's judging. It's full of biases because it's the venting part of us, the complaining part, not just noticing what happened. My boss called me and asked about my project, but adding all the rest onto it that really we make up. It's not based in reality. It's not truthful.
Okay. So to what extent does... you almost answered the question. I just want to restate this again. Your approach works in the United States. Does it work as well in Brazil as in India as in Germany?
I know that it works well in Germany and India. I haven't personally tried it in Brazil. There are our culture shows up both in ego and non-ego ways, right? And so depending on our culture, that might be the type of flavor our ego shows up in. But anytime we feel separate from one another, it's because of judgment. And so we talk a lot about stop judging, start helping. And it's getting beyond why we can't to how we could. It's all of these shifts that we need to make to be able to join in to create things together, rather than separate out and then blame another. And that, I believe, is cross-culturals. It shows up in some different ways.
Okay, so we all do the same things, but in a different way.
Yes, exactly. So, the spiritual path of Buddhism isn't just centered in some cultures, although some cultures have readily adopted it. Those universal principles, whether it's, religion or spirituality, when we find the universal principles, they tend to supersede cultures. Many people can ascribe to them.
I'm trying to think this. I'm trying to think about Indians and their and compared to the United States. If you look at, for instance, at hierarchy is a lot stronger in India than it is in the U.S. For instance, Americans are the most individualistic nation in the world. You've mentioned that as well. Indians are relatively a lot more collectivistic. To what extent does that have an influence? And how does it take on a different shape?
I think if you look at America, a lot of times we ascribe our suffering to things that we feel we've missed out on individually.
Mm-hmm.
Where in India, there's still mental suffering. It's just ascribed to different root causes. So in India, when people
Okay.
are collective or more hierarchical, they may blame someone above them, or they may blame, leftover separation like caste on society. In America, we may blame it on that some people, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and that some people don't understand where I'm coming from.
Right.
Anytime we blame our external circumstances or other people for our current happiness,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how it is set up in the culture,
Yeah.
is where we come together in a similar fashion.
Okay, that makes good sense. So, you started about this. You painted this example about the light switch, which actually got there because you got screwed by
The contractor.
the fixer, the person who put it there. So, how do I interrupt my own thinking there? How do I stop myself there?
Self-reflection. So self-reflection and venting are two mutually exclusive activities.
Say that again,
So
please, Cy.
self-reflection
Yeah.
and venting.
Venting.
So my ego likes to vent.
Yes.
And while I'm venting, I am saying that everybody else is to blame and that I'm the innocent victim.
Mm-hmm.
To get out of venting into self-reflection involves some personal curiosity. So if I'm venting about the light switch, a question that says, what do I know for sure, could get me out of being so right about the contractor screwing me to self-reflecting that I really don't know anything for sure. And that dissolves all the emotion that was going into this sure state that my contractor took advantage of me.
Don't get people
Does that
upset
make
when you say this.
The way we present it, yes, people don't get upset, but the ego gets mad because self-reflection's the death to the ego.
Yeah.
And in order to stay alive, the ego likes to stay mildly irritated all the time. It eats anger for lunch.
Yeah.
Let me kind of explain. Like in your prefrontal cortex or your frontal cortex is where the ego lives, right? And behind that is this incredible place of your best part of your brain, innovation, collaboration. It's beyond ego. So Rumi, the great poet, said, out beyond the field of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And this is like this field beyond ego. So if you're venting, you're not self-reflecting. If you're self-reflecting, you aren't venting. You just can't do both at the same time. So the whole premise of the book is to move people from venting and gossiping and tattling and judging to the better part of their brain, which is beyond the ego. And you do that through initiating self-reflection, either on yourself or another person. A great question for self-reflection for a team or individuals is, what would great look like? So if I'm saying we don't have enough money and our leaders don't care about us and corporate office, is trying to make it difficult for us, and we don't have the IT we need, the technology, we don't have the money. All of that is venting, and it could be absolutely true.
Yeah.
But my job as a leader is not to collude with you and go, I know, therefore there's something we can do. My job as a leader is to go beyond the ego and call you up to greatness, because that venting's not going to get us anyplace. So I might say, okay, everybody, what would great look like? If we were great right now, what would great look like? And everybody knows what great looks like because it's what we judge other people on. We just don't take that advice for ourselves. I might say, gosh, I know what great looks like. It would be that we were coming together, soliciting ideas, focusing on how we can. And that just takes the whole energy in the room away from venting and waste into self-reflection and impact. Is that starting to clarify it?
Yeah, I wrote down self-reflecting is the death of ego, correct?
It really is.
Yeah, okay. That's
and the ego, venting is the ego's way of avoiding self-reflection. So if
one more time that last phrase, please.
Venting is the ego's way of avoiding self-reflection.
Right. Okay.
So if I'm venting, I'm not going to get to self-reflection, and I'm not going to get to that place beyond the ego.
No, because they're mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Go Good stuff. I'm staring at. I start with a blank sheet and I scribble it.
I love it. Nice, Chris.
There was nothing on there, so it's. I'm enjoying myself here. There's one more concept here that I'd like to explore with you, which is you call that super culture.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit what you mean with super culture?
Sure. So as I have worked with multicultural teams, and a lot of the focus got to be on people saying, well, that's really not, my culture doesn't really support that,
Exactly.
or that's not natural for me in my culture. And I would say, in order for us to create good stuff together, would you entertain bypassing your own culture and joining a super culture, which is all about what is science and evidence-based about what could work. So let me give you an example. I think we can all agree that the more open communication is, the more robust dialogue is, the better the answers are that we come up with, right? So
Yes.
if we can have everyone on our team somehow get out of their creative minds some ideas that we can all see and hear and put in front of us, the better. We would all agree that a super culture would be the ability to access everyone's ideas and to understand that because they were communicated to us. And yet I sat on a team where 3 of my colleagues would tell me, when I would ask them, what keeps you from bringing ideas forward? Because I trust that you're very brilliant people. And these 3 colleagues were from different cultures, but their cultures all supported not speaking up in meetings, not speaking up if there was someone that was on the org chart a higher level than them. And so what I worked with them on, invited them to, and they rose up to, is I said, well, your culture of origin supports that. We know that results come from this other behavior. What are things that you could do to be willing to move beyond your culture of origin and join up with a super culture, one that is confident that the more dialogue we have on the table, the better our ideas are? And through that, as a leader, people were really able to look at their cultures of origin and make choices about, when does my culture of origin help and when does it hinder? And so as an American, I need to know that my culture of origin is all about expression and my idea. But there are many times that my culture of origin is not helpful. It's hindering. And so I need to join up and align with a super culture, which is one that says, let's make sure that we have the ideas of many on the table. And so when you take what we're researching and studying in successful worldwide businesses, there are some things arising that are universal principles, just like in spirituality and religion, that cross all. And those are happening in business too, where we say we know that great results come from this type of behavior. And we as human beings need to be able to move to a higher level of consciousness that goes beyond our culture of origin. And we need to do it by choice, right? So that we can start saying, I'm good at my culture of origin, but I could be part of great by moving beyond my culture of origin. And so when people talk to me about culture, I also like to talk to them about how could both be true? How could your culture of origin be fantastic as a foundation? And how can you, when it works, move to a super culture and align with that?
Yeah, good stuff.
And how can you be good space travelers back and forth?
Sounds like a book.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do it together.
Why not? No,
I'll partner with you, Chris. I've got the concept, but let's flesh it out.
No, there's good stuff here. It's because it's you're going from good to great. Somebody else wrote about that as well.
I know.
From good to great, but
it's
but you can. I mean, if good is your own culture, then how about great? No culture is great. It's only good. It is what it is.
It is, and where some of this started to dawn on me, Chris, and I know you believe this too, because I've looked at some of your stuff, is when I was in healthcare and we, in the United States, in our rural area, started to care for people from many different parts of the globe. they hand it out to be culturally sensitive, like a chart. And if somebody was Somalia, then, you follow the chart and they
Right.
obviously were X, Y, and Z. It
Yeah.
was very prescriptive and impossible. One, not everybody, just because you're Somalian, is X, Y, and Z.
No.
And secondly, you had to memorize the chart. And my staff was just screwing this up all over the place, right? And so I said, let's just simplify this. And I think superculture is a way to simplify it. I said, why don't you just ask every patient that you connect with,
Yeah.
what's one thing I could do to show my respect for who you are
Right.
and your culture?
Yeah.
What's one thing I could do that would show you that I value that and that I want to stress the importance of acknowledging that in you? And that one question, they could use it anywhere. Solicited this self-referral where people were able to let you know what was important to them. And then we were able to make that happen.
Cool. Excellent. I think we need to talk about this Superculture, a book. But after the interview, then, and then get the details. I'm looking at the clock here, Cy. We're 35 minutes into.
Oh my goodness!
Into recording. That means that we've got some good stuff going for sure. So there are a couple of things still I'd like to talk about. Of course, where can people get the book?
Any of their local booksellers, obviously online, Amazon and Barnes & Noble, you can pre-order if you're listening to this before September 19, 2017. Otherwise, any major bookseller.
Okay, excellent. And the standard question I ask everyone, can you give us 3 tips to become more culturally competent?
Absolutely. My best tip is stop believing everything you think. Just because you thought it doesn't mean it's true. So question your thinking. Secondly, stop judging, start helping. Notice how quick you are to judge what's wrong with something rather than take it in and think about how can I add to this rather than negate it or take away.
Yeah.
And the third one, I think, is what I call open heart, open mind. Whenever my mind is closing down where I'm judging something, I try and open my heart up to be more compassionate.
Yeah.
And whenever my heart is clamping down that I'm not open to another person or being, I try and get mentally flexible and open my mind up. The part of me that closes is usually the hardest to open. So I use the opposite. If my heart's open, my mind's open. If my mind's open, my heart's open. And so I just notice what's the state of my mind. If it's closing, I can open my heart. My mind comes back open. Okay. And so I do a lot of work when I'm in new situations or in uncharted waters where I just keep checking, is my mind open? Is my heart open? Is my mind open? Is my heart open? And if I'm open, then I'm learning a lot and I'm accessing all the help I need in order to be a good player on that team.
Great. Sounds good. 3 tips from Cy Wakeman. How can people get in touch with you if they want to?
Absolutely. Our website is realitybasedleadership.com. And you can follow me at Cy Wakeman on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those great social media channels.
Okay, excellent. Now, there's one last thing, and that's only for the people that are watching this on YouTube, because you can actually watch this on YouTube by going to culturematters.com/YouTube. The paintings, Cy, because we started with that, because, I mean, I've been staring at you and staring at the painting.
And the paintings.
So tell us quickly, what's the background behind the paintings here?
The gentleman who painted them, and his name is Adria, Adria. This is called Crazy Friday. He is currently in Mexico, which is where I bought the paintings. But when he was younger, his history, I've been told, is that as a young boy, he cleaned out workshops, and Picasso actually worked in those workshops. So he was exposed, as you can see, some influence from Picasso, but his work is amazing.
Yes, very much. It looked like it. You actually gave me a bit of a round tour in your office. You don't have to do that right now. But it's for those people who are listening to the podcast, the audio version only, it's very much worth going to the YouTube channel, because it's the first thing that pops to mind, or comes to mind, is indeed Picasso. All right, very colorful personality, colorful painting, colorful subjects as well. Thank you so much, Cy, for being on the show, and I'm pretty sure we'll talk again in the future.
Great. It's been a pleasure, Chris.
Bye-bye.